Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and today's video is one I've been looking forward to all year. It is the official start to spoiler season for my most anticipated set, Duskmourn. Now, if this first batch of cards is anything to go by, this set is looking to really throw some curveballs at us and really change up the way Magic is played, and honestly, there's a ton of craziness. We just need to dive into the cards. Before we do, make sure you like the video if you haven't already. It's you guys liking every video that has helped this channel to grow so quickly, and I am so appreciative of everyone that's helped me out with that, so thank you so much. Slam that like button. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe so you never miss an upload. Tons of crazy spoiler content on the way, as well as some crazy Bloomborough deck techs that I still have yet to roll out, so look forward to all of that. We're going to hit the ground running. We're going to cover spoilers every single day because, like I said, I'm super pumped about this set. The themes and even just the mechanics, it's just a match made in heaven. I'm going to shut up. Let's jump right in. We're going to start with Valgavoth's Lair. For those of you who don't know, Valgavoth is the big bad in this set, and this is a land that is an enchantment land. It has hexproof. It enters tapped, and as it enters, you get to choose a color. You tap it, you add a mana of the chosen color. Now, obviously, entering the battlefield tapped is a pretty big downside, but getting to choose any color whatsoever isn't bad. We've seen lands like that before, but I think what makes this one stand out and what's going to fly under the radar a little bit about this land is simply the fact that it's an enchantment. It counts as an enchantment, and for any sort of archetypes where the deck really cares about going wide with as many enchantments as possible, this counts as another enchantment on the battlefield, and it's one that you can kind of play for free. It takes up your land drop, but you can get it out there, get kind of a head start on your number of enchantments, your enchantment count on the battlefield, and that can be really good. And then also this hexproof is pretty cool because it protects it from land destruction. You can also do some really cool things. There's plenty of cards where we can turn lands into creatures. So if we happen to turn Valgavoth's Lair into a creature, it's still going to keep that hexproof, and it's still going to be an enchantment, which is really cool. So a lot of little bits of extra value to be had with this card in the right decks, and I think this one doesn't look super impressive right out of the gate, but as we see more cards in this set and more ways to synergize with enchantments and more ways that enchantments just matter in general, I think you're gonna start to really see this card in a different light, and I have a feeling it's gonna end up being a lot better than it looks right now by the time we know the entire set. But moving on, we've got Norrin, Swift Survivalist. This is just 1 red mana for a 2/1 legendary human coward. He can't block, and whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, you may exile it. You may play that card from exile this turn. When you think about it, this card's kind of crazy. A 2/1 for 1 is already pretty decent, but everything that gets killed in combat can just be replayed right away during your second main phase, as long as you have enough mana. Now, you do have to play it right away from exile. You can only replay it that turn, but it's going to work for every single thing that becomes blocked. So if it's going to die and it becomes blocked, just exile it and replay it. You get to basically save every single attacker that they would get to kill in combat and just recast them. And honestly, it's not too bad just waiting for your second main phase to play out your hand to see if maybe you do need to replay some of your creatures that were blocked in combat. And then if you don't, you know, use the mana you have left over in your second main to play out stuff from your hand. So I think this thing's going to be a lot crazier in practice than people might realize at first glance, and I think once people start to use it and realize just how much value they can get out of it and that all of their attackers just keep coming back and your opponent just can't get rid of them due to combat damage, you can't even use a combat trick in combat to get rid of a creature, because if they use a combat trick and make their guy huge and try to kill your dude, you just exile it and replay it. So lots of crazy little trickery you can get up to with this guy. I think he's going to be really nuts. But next up, we've got Zimone, All Questioning. This is a 1/1 legendary human wizard for 3 mana in the colors of Simic. And at the beginning of your end step, if a land entered the battlefield under your control this turn, and you control a prime number of lands, create Primo, the Indivisible, a legendary 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token, and then you put that many +1/+1 counters on it. So however many lands you have on the battlefield, whatever that prime number is, that's how many counters are going to go on top of Primo. I think it's Primo. Primo. Let me know in the comments if you think you have it figured out. But it's really interesting that they're actually introducing a card like this that cares about prime numbers to this extent, and that they're going to make you math. They're going to make you math like you never mathed before. Whoever said math is for blockers, well, they haven't seen Zimone here, right? So, interesting. Make your opponent learn to math and constantly make this Primo the Indivisible. I think what's really cool about this is use this in a ramp deck and you can just keep making this creature, and even though it's legendary, you can keep trading the token in combat, knowing that as soon as you hit your next prime number, you're just going to make another one and it's going to be even bigger. So it just gives you this constant fodder to block and trade with your opponent's threats, to drag out the game, to buy yourself time, till eventually you have a Primo that is so big, it can just take over the battlefield. So really cool card. I'm not 100% sure how good it will be, but I can't wait to see it in action, because I have a feeling there is going to be a pretty gnarly way to abuse this once somebody figures it out. But next up, we've got Veteran Survivor. 1 white mana for a 2/1 human survivor. It has the survival ability, so at the beginning of your second main phase, if Veteran Survivor is tapped, you exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. And then as long as there are 3 or more cards exiled with Veteran Survivor, it gets +3/+3 and has hexproof. I kind of really like this ability, this idea that if it can survive attacking in for enough combats, it gets this huge buff and becomes a much more viable threat on the board. Thematically, it fits super well, but also mechanically, I think it'll be fun to pull off. It's obviously gonna be at home in an aggro deck more so than anything else, but I don't know, I really like this ability. I can't wait to see what other cards use it and in what ways, because I think there could be some really interesting ways to make an ability like this work. And it's cool if we can figure out some ways to tap our creatures without necessarily attacking in. Even though the ability is meant to sort of thematically portray surviving a bunch of combats, you can kind of mechanically abuse it by finding other ways to tap your creatures and turn on the survival. And that could be really interesting. I think this card is just begging to be broken in that way, or this mechanic in general is begging to be broken in that way. So I'm excited to try and like really tear into it on a deeper level and see what we can do with this survival mechanic when we have other ways to tap creatures. So this should be pretty cool. But moving on, we've got Winter, Misanthropic Guide. This is a 3/4 legendary human warlock with Ward 2 for 4 mana in the colors of Jund, and at the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws 2 cards. That's already kind of crazy, right? Pair this with 𝐶𝐿DRID, and you're burning them for 6 damage every turn and gaining 6 life yourself, you know, every turn cycle because of the extra drawn cards. That already seems kinda nuts. Just drawing extra cards is crazy because it happens on your turn, which means you're gonna probably be the one to get the first use of that extra card advantage. If your opponent's drawing creatures or sorcery speed things, they're not going to be able to use it right away. Sure, if they get lucky and draw an instant, they could use it as soon as they draw it on your turn. But them having to draw those cards on your upkeep specifically means you get first crack at using the card advantage, and that already makes this ability a lot better than it looks like. But then you also have this Delirium ability that makes it even better. So as long as there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, each opponent's maximum hand size is equal to 7 minus the number of those card types. So if you do get up to 7 different card types in your graveyard, your opponent's maximum hand size is going to be 0, which means at the end of their turn, they'll have to discard everything. If you can get to that point, it means they'll never be able to play instant speed spells on your turn again for the rest of the game, at least as long as Winter gets to stay on the battlefield. So getting to that point is pretty nuts. But honestly, there's a spectrum here where even if you don't pull off a full 7 for that Delirium ability, you're still going to get a lot of value out of reducing their hand to 3 cards or 2 cards or whatever the case may be, and force them into a position where they can't keep all of the extra value that they're drawing from getting to draw 2 extra cards during your upkeep. So you can really kind of force them to get even less out of the deal than they were already getting. And there's just so many ways to take this card and to try to abuse it. So I'm actually super interested in you guys and what ideas you might have on trying to abuse Winter, because I think it's a super fun card. And like I said before, with things like 𝐒𝐿𝑑 already existing, there's got to be ways to completely bust this guy wide open, right? So I'm excited to see what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. But we're going to move on. Next up, we've got Unwanted Remake. This is 1 white mana for an instant. You destroy target creature, and its controller gets to manifest Dread. Now, when you manifest Dread, what that means is the player that's manifesting Dread looks at the top 2 cards of their library, and then they put one onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature, and the other into their graveyard. If the face down 2/2 is a creature card on its bottom side, it can be turned up at any time for its mana cost. So it's very similar to, you know, the mechanics that we saw not too long ago with Disguise and stuff like that in, I believe it was Murders at Karlov Manor, that mechanic was in. It's very similar to that. We don't have the ward here, but we do have this extra value of getting to stick one of the cards in the graveyard, and you can get extra value off of that with, you know, cards that want to be in your graveyard that have flashback, or being able to turn on Delirium or Threshold. There's so many interesting ways to just get a little bit of extra value off of, you know, binning a card to begin with, but getting a free 2/2 creature and then being able to turn it face up into a relevant threat if it's actually a creature is kind of insane. And, you know, being able to use this as versatile removal is interesting, because for just 1 mana you can get rid of any creature. Like, sure, they're gonna get that value, and if they get lucky, it could be insane value later on when they have the mana to flip whatever they hit, but you're still taking out whatever you want for just 1 mana at instant speed. It's like the closest thing we've seen to Swords to Plowshares, probably since Swords to Plowshares. Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong about that, but it's pretty powerful because you also have the versatility of hitting your own creature, and you can even hit your own creature in response to it dying to your opponent's removal. If they target it with removal, you could respond by playing Unwanted Remake on your own creature, just so you can manifest Dread yourself. So there's some versatility in how it can be used, and you can get really clever with the sorts of things that you can use this for. But at the end of the day, being able to have, you know, removal that hits any creature at all for just 1 mana at instant speed is going to be nuts, no matter what kind of value they get to replace it. So I think this card is pretty bananas. It's going to be better in some decks, of course. The less creatures your opponent has, if they're playing like a control deck with certain win conditions that are creatures, but not a lot of other creatures, this is going to be that much better because they're less likely to hit a creature off the top when they manifest Dread, which means when they get that 2/2, it's just stuck as a 2/2 forever. So yeah, it's really interesting. I can't wait to kind of see where this card goes. But next up we have Razorkin Needlehead, and this card is bananas in my humble opinion. This is a 2/2 human assassin for 2 red mana. It has first strike during your turn, so it's really good in an aggressive deck. It's probably going to see a lot of play in mono red aggro, but it has this other ability. Whenever an opponent draws a card, Razorkin Needlehead deals 1 damage to them. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of like a mini 𝐒𝐿𝑑, except it comes out for 2 mana at a point in the game when it can be really aggressive and be swinging in with first strike, which helps you just race down their life total that much quicker in an aggro deck. But this mini 𝐒𝐿𝑑 ability that lets you just ping them every single time they draw a card is kind of crazy, and being able to get it out a couple extra turns earlier than 𝐒𝐿𝑑 almost makes up for the fact that it's only 1 damage instead of 2, And then when you add into that the fact that it's technically damaged, so there are ways in which you can make this card a little bit better than 𝐒𝐿𝐷. If you have anything that you can play that can make things that deal damage do more damage, like say mechanized warfare, things like that, you can actually start to increase the amount of damage that every trigger deals. And that can get really crazy. In addition, if you happen to give Razorkin Needlehead lifelink, you can gain life every time the ability goes off and deals damage. There's all these little subtle silver lining ways to get even more out of this card than you could get out of a 𝐒𝐿𝐷. And I honestly think once the dust settles, this card might be as good, possibly better. I'm not going to go as far as to say it is better than 𝐒𝐿𝐷, because that's one hell of a claim, but I will go as far as to say I think when the dust settles, at the very least, I think people will see this card as good as 𝐒𝐿𝐷, which that's insane enough as it is, because 𝐒𝐿𝐷 kind of runs roughshod over the entire meta, and it's just an automatic include in most black decks. So if this guy is even close to that, he's going to be everywhere, and I honestly think he has a really good chance of being considered just as good. I'm definitely going to be brewing some crazy stuff with him, because he just seems like he takes the clock down so quick. I just love him. And he's an assassin. So this gives us another 2-drop assassin. We can finally rebuild Assassin Tribal. We finally have enough relevant 2-drops to make that deck really good again. You know, the one that uses Etrata and stuff. I put it up on the channel a while ago, but I think it's about time for a new one. This guy being a really good 2-drop assassin really kind of pushes me to make that happen sooner rather than later. So I'm just really excited this guy exists. I think he's nuts. And I don't even really like mono red aggro as a deck, and this guy will most assuredly be run as a 4 of in that deck. So it's kind of not likely that I would normally like a card like this, but I just think it's kind of insane and I love it. So deal with it. But next up we've got Fear of Immobility. This is 1 white and 4 for a 4/4 enchantment creature nightmare. And when Fear of Immobility enters, you tap up to 1 target creature. If an opponent controls that creature, you put a stun counter on it. So, some versatility here. This is a common, but you kind of get a glance at what limited is going to look like and the direction they're trying to go. Enchantments matter in a huge way. Being able to tap things down, put stun counters on them is sort of par the course, and it seems like we're getting a lot more removable options in this set that do some of that tapping down and adding stun counters and stuff. It seems to be a lot more prevalent, so pretty interesting. I'm just excited that we're getting enchantment creatures back and that they're going to be prominent enough that we're seeing commons that are enchantment creatures, because I think there's potential to really make that feel really special this time around with the way this set thematically feels. So I'm just really interested to see what other nightmares there are. But next up we've got Enduring Curiosity. Speaking of enchantment creatures, this is a 4/3 enchantment creature, Cat Glimmer, with flash for 2 blue and 2. And whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. When Enduring Curiosity dies, if it was a creature, you return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. It is now an enchantment, but not a creature. So all of these enduring cards are creatures that when they die come back as a non-creature version of themselves. And that makes them insanely good. Like, way better than I think most people realize. Your opponent having to use removal on them twice to get rid of whatever effect they have is crazy. And the fact that if they don't have removal the first time, you have a body that can be a win condition, that can put in work and add to board presence is nuts. And even if they do get rid of it, you still get to keep the ability. They don't get rid of the ability because it comes back as a non-creature version. It's just super resilient. It never really goes away. It takes twice the removal to get rid of on your opponent's part. And when it comes back as a non-creature, you can't even get rid of it with creature removal then. You have to use enchantment removal specifically. It's almost good if your opponent kills it with creature removal, because that's one less piece of creature removal they can use on your other stuff, but then you still get to keep the ability, and then it's a lot harder to kill because it's not a creature. So I feel like there's going to be this really interesting play pattern we see with something like this, I almost feel like your opponent has to try to trade in combat and get rid of it that way to try to save a little bit of value and card advantage. I don't know, these cards just seem insane, but this one in particular is super cool because of the flash. You can come down after your opponent declares blockers when you already know you're going to get through for an attack, and then you know you're going to draw a card, and it's too late for your opponent to change blockers at that point, and you're definitely drawing a card. Whereas if they knew that Curiosity was coming down, maybe they block in a way where they make sure you don't get in. Maybe it makes sense then because they don't want you to draw a card. But maybe it's detrimental enough to block in a certain way. Maybe they don't want to trade a creature or whatever, so they let it through because they don't know the Curiosity is coming. So I think the flash is going to matter. I think it being a 4-power creature for 4 matters because it can trade really well, or it can bait out your opponent's removal, and the ability is just awesome. So I don't know, this card's just nuts. I think all the Enduring cards are honestly pretty nuts, and I could talk about them forever, so we're just going to move on to the next card. The next one is Disturbing Mirth. This is an enchantment for 2 mana in the colors of Rakdos, and when it enters, you may sacrifice another enchantment or creature, and if you do, you draw 2 cards. And when you sacrifice Disturbing Mirth, you get to manifest Dread. So what's cool about this is once you have 1 Disturbing Mirth on the battlefield, you could sacrifice it to a second Disturbing Mirth that you play, in order to manifest Dread from the first Disturbing Mirth, while still getting the card draw from the ability that triggers on the new Disturbing Mirth. So, pretty awesome in multiples. You're definitely going to want to play 4 of this card in whatever you play it in, but it makes me wonder if there's more enchantments that sort of mechanically work in a similar way, and if you could start to use other enchantments that have their own effects that also care about being sacrificed, that also allow you to sacrifice other enchantments or creatures when you play them, then you could start to kind of chain them together and get a whole bunch of value. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself because we don't really know if it's a cycle, we don't really know if it's a subset and a theme, and that, you know, there's multiple cards that are going to work this way. We only know about this one for now, but if there are, you could do some really crazy stuff and make a really interesting deck. That being said, even with just the Enduring cards that we've already seen, where they, you know, start as an enchantment creature, and when they die, they come back as just a normal enchantment version that isn't a creature, you could just sack one of those to this, because you know it's just going to come back anyway. You're going to get to keep the ability, but you're still going to get to draw cards. So lots of really interesting ways, I think, to utilize this. Obviously, it's going to be really good in, you know, any of like the discard, Nurturing Fairy style decks where you're playing, you know, very cheap enchantments that are making your opponents discard, and then you have a bunch of sacrifice fodder for something like this, as well as other crazy win conditions like Rottenmouth Viper and stuff like that. So I actually think there's a fair number of interesting ways to try to build around something like this, and I'm just really crossing my fingers that this is a theme and that we see more cards that work in a similar fashion to this card, because I think if you can get more than one card like this together and just kind of mash them into the same deck, they can really help support each other and make something really nuts. So hopefully that will be a thing, and we'll be able to make it happen. But next up, we've got Split Up, and this is the Wrath of God board sweep variant for this set. 2 white and 1 for a sorcery, and then you get to choose one. You destroy all tapped creatures, or you destroy all untapped creatures. The fact that you get to choose makes this card really interesting, because if you're playing against another aggressive deck, you can just play this during your first main phase, destroy every creature that they attacked with, and your creatures are all still sitting there untapped and untouched. And then you can just swing in for whatever you want, and your opponent doesn't really have much of a board left to crack back at you with. In a similar fashion, if you're up against like a very defensive deck that's keeping all of their creatures untapped to try to block, you could swing in with your team, and maybe they're going to block some of them, maybe they're going to kill some of your creatures, but anything that survives the combat will then be tapped, and then you can play Split Up during your second main phase, kill everything that's untapped, all of your guys that are still alive survive, their whole board goes away because they held up everything as blockers. So The versatility of getting to choose one way or the other is really cool, and depending on what kind of deck you run it in, you might want to lean more on choosing one than the other. But the fact that in any given moment you get to kind of change gears and pick the other thing, or try to set your opponent up for a one-sided sweep while you keep your stuff, makes this card really fun. Honestly, one of the more fun sweepers we've seen in a while, because it incentivizes you to make really interesting decisions during play, and to try to think ahead, and to try to put your opponent in specific situations and almost play chess with them in a way, so that you can capitalize on it by then playing a very well-timed split up. So really interesting take on a Wrath of God style variant, and I'm excited to dive in and see what this card can do. But next up, we've got Fear of Lost Teeth. This is 1 black mana for a 1/1 enchantment creature nightmare. So it's another one of those common enchantment creatures that we were talking about before that I'm pretty stoked about. When Fear of Lost Teeth dies, it deals 1 damage to any target and you gain a life. So this is the perfect kind of card to use in any kind of Sacrifice Matters deck where you're trying to go wide, sack your stuff for value. You get extra value off sacrificing Fear of Lost Teeth, but if you're somehow able to cross-pollinate that synergy with an Enchantment Matters type of synergy, or deck that really cares about going wide with enchantments, and kind of do both in the same deck, if there are mechanics or cards that allow for cross-pollination of those two synergies, then a card like this is going to be perfect, where you can get your sacrifice payoffs, you can get your enchantment payoffs, and just really get absolutely max value out of this card. But even just in limited, I'm excited that something like this at the common slot exists. I'm really excited to see, how deep they go with enchantments in limited, and what kind of extra value we can get off building around something like this. So super excited to see cards like this Nightmare Cycle exist. But next up, we have Dollmaker Shop and Porcelain Gallery. And I made another card here so that we can better read this and check it out. So this is a new type of split card. It's an enchantment room, so it does count as an enchantment. And how it works is just like any split card, you choose one side or the other to play when you play it. But it's a permanent, so it's not like you play one side and then it goes to the graveyard like past versions of split cards. Instead, it stays on the battlefield as an enchantment room, and then at any point in time at sorcery speed, you can pay the mana cost of the other side of it, the side that you didn't play, in order to unlock that side. So thematically, the way it works is it comes into play with the door unlocked for one side and locked for the other. So the unlocked room is going to be the one that is active, and the other one is not active. And then at any, like I said it before, at any point in time, you can just pay the mana cost of the side that's still locked, unlock the door to that room, and then both sides will be active. So it's not like you're replacing one side with the other later on. You're getting whichever side you want first, and then later on, at sorcery speed, you pay the mana to also unlock the second side, and then both sides are active. So in that way, it kind of mechanically functions similar to classes, where you can kind of level them up and they get more abilities by spending more mana. It works in this very similar fashion, but there are some slight details that make it different. When this is in your hand, it's going to count as having a converted mana cost of the total of both cards. So in this case 8, it's going to count as a total mana cost of 8 in your graveyard, so it can be good for things like collecting evidence, stuff like that. And yeah, it's just, there's some really interesting nuance that does separate it from things like classes that we've seen in the past. And I think just flavorfully, it's a huge win. I kind of love what they did here, and I like that the art is just one art, and they actually made the thing that divides the two cards a part of the art itself. They're kind of showing what's in between the walls, between the two rooms. And I just kind of love that from a flavor standpoint. So I think these cards are really cool. I'm super excited to see what other kinds of rooms there are. So Dollmaker Shop is 2 mana, and whenever one or more non-toy creatures you control attack a player, you create a 1/1 white toy artifact creature token. Pretty nuts. You do have to play with other creatures to trigger it, but it's just going to keep spitting out tokens every time you attack, which is kind of crazy. And then Porcelain Gallery is 6 mana, and creatures you control have base power and toughness, each equal to the number of creatures you control. I sort of love that the 2 sides help each other, and if you play the cheaper side first, which is most likely going to happen most of the time, you get to start building up this board state of 1/1s that don't really matter as much, but then as soon as you unlock the other side, they all become super huge. I just sort of love this. It's going to be good in any kind of go wide deck, I think. Yeah, I'll be really interested to see what kind of decks this shows up in, because it's a super cool concept. But next up we have Scrabbling Skullcrab. This is 1 blue mana for a 0/3 crab skeleton. I hope it doesn't mill. Please don't mill. Please don't mill. It has the Eerie ability. Whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, target player mills 2 cards. Oh, it does mill. I don't want to see mill return in standard. Please don't do it. Please. I hope this isn't good enough. But anyway, the Eerie ability actually seems really cool, regardless of the fact that I kind of hate that it mills. So Eerie, the way Eerie works is it's anything with an Eerie ability is going to trigger whenever you play an enchantment, or rather whenever an enchantment enters. So if you flicker an enchantment, that will count too. And also whenever you fully unlock a room. So all of those room cards, there's extra value to be had with them if you're combining them in decks with cards like this that have these Eerie abilities, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be a bunch of cards with this Eerie ability, probably a lot more interesting ones when we get into rares and mythics. So being able to get value out of, you know, those room cards and getting both sides unlocked, but then getting extra value out of Eerie triggers like this seems really interesting. And you don't even need to just play with rooms in order to make Eerie work. You could just play an enchantment deck that plays a bunch of enchantments and still, you know, get Eerie to work well for you enough to play Eerie cards, or just play rooms and use Eerie with that, or do some combination where you're playing a bunch of enchantments that aren't rooms, or you're playing enchantments that are rooms, you're playing both, and you're getting to get extra value off Eerie both ways. There's a lot of versatility, a lot of potential. It's hard to say exactly how good it is or what direction it will go without seeing the rest of the Eerie cards, but the fact that this sort of ability exists is super, super interesting to me. The fact that it mills is not, and I want it to die in a pit of fire. But moving on, we have Peer Past the Veil. This is a 4 mana instant in the colors of Gruul. You discard your hand and then draw X cards, where X is the number of card types among cards in your graveyard. Kind of interesting. If you need to fill up your graveyard quick for Delirium or for Threshold or something like that, being able to chuck your whole hand in there at instant speed, kinda cool, especially when you get to draw a whole bunch of cards to begin with. And if you've been self-milling yourself or discarding stuff the entire game prior to playing this, you could have a pretty full graveyard where it's pretty easy to like discard 4 or 5 cards and draw a full grip of 7 or maybe 8 cards because of the way that your graveyard looks. So I don't know, jury's out on this one. There's a lot of potential to draw a ton of cards with it, but it would have to be in just the right deck. And it also matters how helpful that discard your hand is and how much you're able to get value off of that part of the card. That being said, it is an instant speed spell that can draw you a bunch of cards, so it's possible this could be amazing, it's possible it could be but we'll have to wait and see. Either way, the potential is there. But next up we have Enduring Innocence. This is another one of those enchantment creatures in the Enduring cycle. This is a 2/1 enchantment creature, Sheep Glimmer, with lifelink for 2 white and 1. And whenever one or more other creatures you control with power 2 or less enter, you draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So this is nuts. You're going to get to draw cards, an extra card every turn, whenever any creature with power 2 or less enters that you control. On top of having a 2/1 lifelinker, on top of if this dies in combat or gets removed by your opponent's removal, it just comes back and still gives you the ability even though it's not a creature anymore. I think this card is insane. I think this card is just insane. If you're playing it in a low to the ground aggro deck, you're going to be drawing an extra card a turn. And if your opponent wastes removal on it, you're still drawing an extra card a turn, and you got them to use up one of their removal spells, which is nuts. And if you have ways of making token creatures at instant speed or flashing in creatures, you could actually draw 2 cards every turn cycle by also making sure you get a creature into play on your side with power 2 or less on their turn. So if you can line it up that you get one on your turn and one on their turn every turn cycle, you could draw 2 cards every turn cycle, and they have to get rid of this twice in order to get rid of it forever. Honestly, an ability like this that's drawing you cards every turn, that's hard to get rid of, that needs to be destroyed twice, is just insane. It's just insane. The fact that it's a 2/1 lifelinking enchantment creature on top of it, at least until they kill it the first time, just makes it batshit crazy, in my opinion. I love this card. Honestly, I think the whole enduring cycle is going to be nuts. And it's going to make it that much more important to have some kind of exile removal so that you can get rid of this stuff just clean and not have to worry about having to use up a ton of card advantage and be at a card disadvantage to get these things finally off the board. Imagine playing with multiples in the same deck. It could be an absolute nightmare for your opponent. I love it. I'm excited to brew with it. I absolutely will. Next up, we have Demonic Council. 1 black and 1 for a sorcery. Search your library for a demon card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. And then it has a Delirium ability. If there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, instead search your library for any card, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. So, if you're in a Delirium deck, if you're able to get 4 or more card types among cards into your graveyard at the same time, reasonably early, this is just Demonic Tutor, right? You just play this and it's Demonic Tutor, which is kind of nuts. But even if you're not too Delirium, you can still use it to search up any demon. And this card is going to be decently good in the right decks, especially decks where they're filling up their graveyard quick. This is going to be pretty solid, but depending on what demons look like in this set and how many really good demons there are, this card could be insane. If the floor of this card, even without Delirium, gives you a lot of versatility in being able to search up, key cards that are useful in different situations, if you have enough support for it with enough interesting demons that are powerful enough, it could just be good enough for that, and then just get even better with the Delirium ability. So it's possible this card could end up being absolutely nuts. But even if that's not the case, in the right decks that are able to get that Delirium easily and quickly, this is just going to be Demonic Tutor anyway, and so at least in those decks it's going to be really good. So I'm excited to see how reasonable this is and how it ends up working. There's definitely got to be some deck out there that makes good use of it. If you've got an idea of where you want to use this card, definitely let me know in the comments. It's got a lot of potential. But next up, we've got Hauntwood's Shrieker, and am I the only one that thinks this card is absolutely insane? I don't understand how this exists. This is a 3/3 Beast Mutant for 2 green and 1, and whenever it attacks, you manifest Dread, which means you look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature, and the other into your graveyard. Turn it face up anytime for its mana cost if it's a creature card. So it's a 3/3 for 3, which is already kind of on rate, and then it just spits out 2/2s every time it swings. But not only does it spit out 2/2s every time it swings, it spits out 2/2s that, if you're building your deck around it appropriately, can most likely turn into much more powerful creatures, can flip up and turn into something really crazy. And then it has this other ability where you can pay 2 mana, reveal target face down permanent. If it's a creature card, you may turn it face up. So not only does this allow you to look at your opponent's face down things and see what kind of tricks might be coming your way, maybe even turn it face up. If it's something worse, it most likely won't, but there is that little bit of extra versatility there. But you can also turn your own stuff face up. If you attack with this and manifest I don't know, an Atraxa, right? You could just pay 2 mana to activate the ability and turn the Atraxa face up. Now, granted, you're not going to get the enters the battlefield trigger or any of that, but still, getting a 7/7 flyer with every keyword ever for 2 mana seems pretty good to me. And not only that, but while you're getting these 2/2s into play, you're also getting to put something in your graveyard when you manifest Dread. So it gets even more value in decks where you care about putting things in your graveyard. So there's just so much potential to this. There's so much value in one card. And to me, it just feels like it's a must-answer threat at 3. It comes down on 3. If they don't get rid of this thing, it's just going to take over the game. I kind of love it. Granted, it is a little bit fickle, right? It is a little bit liable to get hit with removal, right? Or trade in combat. It's not the most resilient creature in the world, so I guess that helps balance it out a little bit, but I still think the potential long-term for this card to just accumulate overwhelming card advantage is nuts. So, I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you agree. But next up, we have the Jolly Balloon Man. I think this is as close as we're ever going to get in Magic to having, like, it as a card. The Clown It. This is a 1/4 legendary human clown with haste for 3 mana in the colors of Boros. And you can pay 1 and tap him to create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control, except it's a 1/1 red balloon creature in addition to its other colors and types, and it has flying and haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. This guy actually does a lot. Since he has haste, if you just wait until you have 4 mana to play him, you can use him immediately when he comes down to make a copy of any creature you control, even if that thing is insane. Maybe it's a Vein Ripper, and granted, the copy is going to be just a 1/1, but it's still going to have all of the abilities. It's going to have any ETB abilities or death triggers. It's going to also have flying and haste, so if it has any triggers that trigger off of attacking or dealing damage in combat or anything like that, all of those things are going to be pretty easy to pull off with this little flyer that can immediately swing in and not be blocked if they don't have a flyer. So I think there's just a lot of ways to use this. I think it reminds me of the backside of Fable of the Mirror Breaker a lot. Obviously, it's not as busted as that because you have to jump through some hoops. It's a little bit more expensive and you don't get the extra value that Fable had. But I still think it can be used in some disgusting, broken ways. And kind of bring back a little bit of that Fable of the Mirror Breaker PTSD that we all still have under the surface. I just think there's a lot of potential for this. What is the best thing to make a token of? We want ETBs, we want death triggers. We can sacrifice the token for sacrificial benefits because it's going to die anyway, so that's even more value we can get off this guy if we plan around that. Definitely let me know in the comments what you think the best target would be, because I feel like there's definitely some ridiculous potential for this guy. But we're going to move on. Next up, we've got Overlord of the Mistmoors. This is a 6/6 enchantment creature avatar horror for a whopping 2 white and 5 mana. But, it sounds like a lot, but he has Impending 4. For 2 white and 2 mana, you can play him as an enchantment that is not a creature yet, that comes into play with a number of time counters on him equal to the impending number, in this case being 4. So it'll come into play with 4 counters on it for only 4 mana. At the end of your turn, you remove a counter, and once you remove the last one, it becomes a creature. Not only that, but whenever Overlord of the Mistmoors enters or attacks, you get to create 2 2/1 white insect creature tokens with flying. So you play this for 4, it enters with 4 counters, it creates 2 2/1 flyers, and then eventually, 4 turns later, it just becomes a 6/6. That's already insane value, but the fact that once it becomes a 6/6, it can swing in every turn and generate 2 more 2/1 flyers every combat makes it even crazier. The fact that you could flicker this and get the ETB ability to trigger again and get you 2 more 2/1 flyers is also nuts. And the fact that it just comes in with counters is gonna matter sometimes for stuff like, I don't know, All Will Be One, where it actually cares about counters. For 4 mana, not only do you get everything that this card has to offer, but if you have an All Will Be One on the battlefield, you're doing 4 damage to whatever you want, because it comes in with 4 time counters. So there's just a lot of ways I think we can take advantage of these impending cards. I am super excited about this mechanic. I have been just waiting to brew around it. All Will Be One is an amazing choice for pairing with cards like this, with these impending cards, but there's even more ways that I think we can get value off of these impending cards that nobody realizes yet. So I'm definitely going to do some brainstorming and some theory crafting and try to come up with some really wild ideas. And I think there's going to be some crazy stuff we can figure out. But if you have any ideas about ways to abuse this guy or just the impending mechanic in general, definitely let me know in the comments. Guy just seems nuts. I love it. I love all of these enchantment creatures. I love this set. Can you tell? But next up we have Kaito, Bane of Nightmares. This is the only planeswalker in this set, but it is a doozy. Comes into play with 4 loyalty counters. It is a 4 mana planeswalker in the colors of Dimir. It has ninjutsu for 3 mana. So you can return an unblocked attacker you control to your hand to put this card onto the battlefield from your hand, tapped and attacking in its place. How can a planeswalker be attacking? Because it also has another static ability. During your turn, as long as Kaito has 1 or more loyalty counters on him, he's a 3/4 ninja creature and has hexproof. So not only is he a planeswalker with loyalty abilities you can use every turn, but he's a 3/4 creature that can attack during your turn, every one of your turns, in addition to using loyalty abilities. And not only that, but he's always going to have hexproof on your turn. So your opponent can't use any kind of instant speed removal or anything that messes with him at instant speed or tries to target him, because he's always going to have hexproof on your turn. Even if you don't swing in with him as a creature, he's still going to technically be that creature and have that hexproof, and your opponent's going to have to find ways to deal with him on your turn if they want to deal with him at all. Now, what are his loyalty abilities? +1, you get an emblem with ninjas you control get +1/+1. This is insane. Getting an emblem every single turn by upticking that just makes your ninjas more and more and more powerful is nuts. The absolute best way to use this guy is going to be in ninja tribal decks, where you go super wide with ninjas, and this guy is just an insane win condition that just turns your board into insanity. You gotta remember, guys, emblems are something outside the game that you cannot get rid of no matter what. It's not the same as playing an Anthem effect. It is so much better. And having a 3/4 hexproof ninjutsu guy come in and also get to uptick and give all of your ninjas +1/+1, of which he will be one every turn, is nuts. It's just, every turn your whole board gets bigger and bigger and bigger in a way they can never get rid of. They can get rid of your creatures, but anytime you play another one, it's gonna just get all those buffs. Those emblems are gonna be nuts. But that's not all. It also has a 0 loyalty ability where you get to surveil 2 and then draw a card for each opponent who lost life this turn. So it has card draw built in if you're running out of gas. That makes it even crazier. And then it also has a -2 ability where you can tap target creature and put 2 stun counters on it. So it gives you board presence. It gives you an insane uptick that turns your board into an absolutely unstoppable wrecking ball. It has card draw, and it has creature removal, all on the same card for just 4 mana. This guy's insane. This guy is absolutely insane. I'm going to go out on a limb right now and say that this is going to be like the new Wandering Emperor. This is going to be the new Planeswalker that is a nightmare, that shows up to just ruin your day constantly, and you have to constantly be on the watch for. I just think he's that good. I think he's insane. He doesn't look that good on the surface. A lot of his abilities are very subtle in the way he works. But when you when you realize the fact that you get a very valuable creature threat with hexproof in addition to a loyalty ability every turn, and that his loyalty abilities are versatile in all of the ways you want from a planeswalker, so that you, whatever board state you're in, you have something you can do. And then add to that the fact that in the right decks, the uptick feels like an ultimate. This guy's just insane. Absolutely insane. Not to mention you can chain multiples together. You can ninjutsu in one to replace another one so that you can use loyalty abilities a second time. You could just do crazy stuff. So I'm excited about this guy. Kaito has been my favorite planeswalker for a while. We're going to make Kaito tribal. I'm telling you right now. We're going to do it. Early access is right around the corner. 24-hour marathon stream I'm going to be doing. It's going to be wild. We're going to make Kaito tribal. Let's do it. But I can't stay on this card forever. So let's get to the last card of the day. This is Valgavoth, Terror Eater. A 9/9 legendary Elder Demon with flying and lifelink for a whopping 3 black and 6. That's 9 mana, guys. That's insane. And granted, this is super expensive, but you're hardly ever going to hardcast this, right? You're always going to find ways to cheat this into play. Probably most notably, it's going to be in a lot of Reanimator decks. I think Reanimator is going to make a big comeback with this card specifically. But this is the big bad of the set, the big enemy that everybody is kind of up against throughout the story in this set. So it makes sense that this card would be this crazy. But it doesn't stop there. It's the abilities that make it so nuts. Like 9/9 flying lifelink is nuts, but the abilities are bananas. Ward, sacrifice 3 non-land permanents. That's crazy. That's so much. If they want to kill this, they have to use up their removal spell in their hand and 3 non-land permanents. They have to 4-for-1 themselves to target this with removal. Like, sure, there's ways around it. You could Sunfall this and then, you know, you get really sad. There's always going to be some way. There has to be some way around it, right? That's what Magic is. There's always an out. There's always something. But most of the time, your opponent's going to have to pay that ward cost to get rid of this, and that is just terrifying. And it's even more terrifying when you see what the rest of the abilities do. If a card you didn't control would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you exile it instead. So any instant or sorcery they play is going to immediately become exiled. Also, any creatures on their side that you kill is going to become immediately exiled. Honestly, any permanents at all on their side that you kill, they're all going to become immediately exiled. Anything you make them discard is going to become immediately exiled. The 3 non-land permanents they sacrifice in order to target this thing, they're going to become immediately exiled. Why does it matter that all of these cards are able to immediately get exiled so easily? Because of its last ability. During your turn, you may play cards exiled with Valgavoth, which is insane. But here's where it gets utterly absurd. If you cast the spell this way, pay life equal to its mana value rather than pay its mana cost. You have to play them all for free. Granted, you need to be in the right kind of deck where you have plenty of life to play the things, but it's just crazy. It's just crazy. You play this in a life gain / reanimator deck, there's got to be some way to cross-pollinate those synergies, right? Make some kind of a life gain reanimator hybrid, get this out super early, but be gaining tons of life every time you cast spells that, like, you have the life to throw around and you just replay everything. There's got to be a way to break this. He just looks insane. Having to pay the life is nice because it balances it out, but at the same time, you don't have to pay the mana cost, and that is bananas. That is, even if you don't play a ton of stuff, costing you a ton of life, just having card selection, 4, 5, 6 different things, you can play that key thing you need to for a little bit of life, even if you don't have a ton of life to spend, right? That alone is going to be really great. The automatic 4-for-1 if they try to get rid of this guy because of the ward is insane. I don't know. It's just, you can play the 3 things that they sacrifice if you want. It's just so crazy. This card is just so crazy. There has to be a very specific way to get the most out of this, though. And I'm not sure what that is yet. I'm going to dig in, I'm going to brainstorm, and I'm going to think about it. We need ways to gain lots of life but we also need ways to cheat this into play, and we need those two things to synergize with each other and with the rest of the cards in the deck. So I think there's a very specific deck out there that this guy is going to be insane in, and we just have to dig deep enough to find it, and I am going to challenge myself to do that. Maybe we figure it out by early access. I'm hoping so. It's going to be a wild time, so I hope to see you guys there. That's happening, what, Wednesday? I want to say, yeah, Wednesday the 18th. September 18th is when early access is. But that's the last card of today, guys. There will be a ton more spoilers on the way. As soon as more spoilers come out, we'll get another video up. In the meantime, I am firing off shorts left and right where I talk about each of the cards, and sometimes when cards are released right away, I'll put up a short for them before I get around to getting the long form video made. So keep your eye on my shorts playlist. I'll make sure to link that in the description for you, because new stuff might pop up there as soon as it drops so that I can get that stuff out to you guys, and then we'll go over it in more detail in longer forms spoiler videos like these when I compile everything from the day. But tons more spoilers on the way, so look forward to that. Thank you so much for sticking by, helping the channel grow. I appreciate it. Smash that like button. Help me get this video out to so many people because it's a lot of work, and I really just want as many people as possible to get their eyes on this. And it's so humbling that we're growing so fast and that you guys have been helping me out with that. So thank you so much. If you're new here, subscribe so you never miss an upload. Like I said, tons of spoiler content coming, but we've even got some deck text still from Bloomburrow that I'm itching to get out to you guys because there's some interesting stuff that no one's thought of yet. So I'm gonna stop rambling. Thank you so much for hanging out. I'll see you on the next one. I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Wonders of the First. Wonders of the First is a brand new collectible card game similar to games like Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, featuring a unique action-based resource economy that helps avoid pitfalls like Mana Flood or Mana Screw, and a battlefield containing multiple realms that unlock over time as you fight for control of the stones. The first 400 card set is called Existence and will launch to retail in the fall, but playtest team starter kits are available to order now. And they haven't forgotten about all you collectors out there. The game contains alternate borderless art variants, as well as highly sought after limited edition numbered prints, culminating in a one-of-one stone foil. And the best part is that the developers have a community-first approach, with 8 print-and-play decks available on their website, as well as a version of the game available on Tabletop Simulator, all for free. For more information, be sure to check out wondersccg.com today. That's wondersccg.com. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.